Fear has entered your life the way a shadow enters a room when the door is left open, not because it belongs there, but because you never questioned its presence. You carried it as if it were a part of your blood, a truth carved into your very bones. Yet fear was never yours. Came from someone else, handed to you, whispered into your mind, planted into your heart, until you thought, this is me. But it was never you. Fear is a borrowed emotion, adopted from society, conditioning, and memory, not born within you. When you entered this world, you arrived without a single trace of fear. You did not hesitate before taking your first breath. You did not worry about falling when you first moved your tiny limbs. You did not question whether you were loved or safe. You came as pure presence, untouched by doubt, untouched by hesitation. Fear was introduced to you later, slowly, subtly, by the people who themselves had been carrying it for generations. They handed you their worries as if they were wisdom, their anxieties as if they were truth, their beliefs as if they were laws. And because you were innocent, open, receptive, you absorbed it all without questioning whether any of it belonged to you. As a child, you did not know danger until someone warned you. You did not know insecurity until someone projected their own onto you. Fear was woven into your mind through repeated messages. Be careful, don't do that. Something bad might happen, the world is dangerous. People can't be trusted. You're too small, you're too weak. Each word entered your psyche and took root, forming layers of belief that shaped the way you saw the world. You didn't question these voices, because the people who gave them to you were the ones you depended on. Their fears became the architecture of your inner world. What you call fear today is nothing but a collection of second-hand experiences, borrowed conclusions, and inherited narratives that have been passed down for centuries. Society has always used fear as a way to tame, control, and shape individuals. A fearful person is easier to manipulate because they doubt themselves. They stay within the lines. They don't take risks. They obey without resistance. From childhood to adulthood, you were taught to fear failure, fear judgment, fear rejection, fear loss, fear the unknown, fear making mistakes. These fears were not discovered through your own experience. They were injected into you long before you had the chance to explore life on your own terms. What the world conditioned you to fear is often not even real. It is an illusion projected by a mind trained to anticipate the worst. Memory also plays its role. After a few unpleasant moments in life, your mind begins to store them as warnings, turning isolated events into universal truths. If you fell once, your mind says you might fall again. If someone hurt you once, your mind insists everyone will. If a plan once failed, your mind whispers that failure is your destiny. This is how fear multiplies, not through reality, but through distorted memory. The mind clings to the past and uses it to create a fearful future, trapping you in a cycle that has nothing to do with the present moment. Yet the fear you carry does not reflect your true nature. At your core, you remain as you were at birth, open, curious, fearless. The layers of fear are superficial, placed upon you from the outside. They can be peeled away through awareness, through understanding, through the courage to question what you have accepted as mine. When you realize that fear was never born within you, that it was borrowed and adopted unconsciously, something profound begins to shift. You no longer experience fear as an identity, but as a leftover imprint of conditioning. And once you see that it is borrowed, you can choose to return it. The mind sustains fear through imagination, while presence dissolves it effortlessly. Fear rarely comes from what is happening in this very moment. It grows from what the mind believes might happen. The mind is a storyteller, constantly creating scenes, possibilities, and outcomes that have no grounding in reality. It projects images of danger, failure, loss, humiliation, and death. These images appear so vivid that the body reacts as if they are happening now. A simple thought becomes a storm, a single doubt becomes a mountain, and the imagination becomes a ghost factory where nothing exists yet everything feels threatening. The mind is never satisfied with the present. It is either replaying yesterday's wounds or anticipating tomorrow's problems. Feeds fear by constantly living anywhere except here. Imagination becomes the fuel of fear because it has no limits. It is capable of magnifying a small worry into a life-altering catastrophe. The mind says, what if you lose everything? What if you fail? What if you get hurt? What if something goes wrong? And the moment you get entangled in these what-ifs, you forget that none of them belong to the present moment. They are mental constructions floating in a future that doesn't exist. Fear cannot survive on facts, it survives on fantasies. It needs your imagination to stay alive. Without these imagined scenarios, fear loses its foundation, because in reality, almost nothing is happening. Danger is rare, but fear is constant because the mind is constantly inventing it. Presence, on the other hand, is the great dissolver of fear. Presence brings you back to what is, this breath, this heartbeat, this moment. When you are anchored in the now, there is no space for imagination to fabricate threats. The mind may still whisper its stories, but they no longer grip you. You see them as thoughts passing by, not as prophecies or warnings. Presence exposes the illusion, revealing that fear was never part of the moment, it was only part of the mind's narrative about the moment. When you are present, the body relaxes, the breath softens, and the inner world becomes clear. You can observe fear without being swallowed by it. You can watch the mind without following it. Presence creates a distance between you and the imagination-based drama that once felt so real. In that distance, fear evaporates naturally. You don't have to fight it, suppress it, or resist it. You only have to be here, fully. Fear cannot coexist with awareness. One is a dream, the other is reality. Imagine holding a torch in a dark room. The darkness disappears not because you pushed it away, but because you brought light. Presence is that light. It shows fear for what it truly is, a shadow created by the mind when awareness is absent. The moment you awaken to the now, the shadow dissolves. You realize that fear was never in the present, it was always in the imagined future. And once you return to presence, fear has nowhere left to hide. Fear loses power the moment you stop identifying with it. Most of the suffering fear creates does not come from the fear itself, but from the belief that it is your fear, that it speaks your truth, that it reflects your nature. The moment you say, I am afraid, you merge yourself with a passing emotion. You give it roots it never had. Fear is simply an energy, a temporary wave moving through the body and the mind. But identification transforms that wave into a storm, into an identity, into a story about who you are. The moment you claim fear as mine, you give it permission to shape your actions, limit your choices, and define the boundaries of your life. Fear knocks at your door, and identification opens it wide. Without identification, fear remains something external, a visitor, not a resident. But the conditioned mind is quick to make everything personal. Every trembling sensation becomes my anxiety, every doubt becomes my weakness, every hesitation becomes my flaw. Identification turns a momentary experience into a fixed self-image, and once fear becomes part of who you think you are, you begin to protect it, defend it, justify it, even nourish it unknowingly. You start avoiding situations that challenge it because you believe you cannot exist without it. But when you pause and observe fear without naming it, without owning it, without calling it yours, something remarkable happens. The fear may still be present, but its intensity lessens. It becomes less solid, less convincing. The moment you say, "Fear is here," instead of "I am afraid," the inner landscape shifts. You create a small space between yourself and the emotion. In that space, awareness begins to operate. Awareness does not fight fear, it simply sees it. And this seeing itself begins to weaken the grip of fear. Fear wants you to believe that you are small, fragile, helpless. But these beliefs arise only when you are entangled with it, when you watch fear as if it belongs to no one, just a sensation, just a pattern arising in consciousness. You become larger than the fear. You see that you are the sky, and fear is only a passing cloud. The cloud cannot overpower the sky unless the sky forgets its own vastness. In the same way, fear cannot dominate your being unless you forget your true nature. Stopping identification does not mean resisting fear. Resistance is another form of identification. It still holds fear at the center. Non-identification means letting fear be exactly as it is, without interpreting it as a personal threat. You watch it rise, move, and eventually fade. You don't strengthen it with stories about what it means or where it came from. You don't give it a name, a narrative, or a history. You simply allow it to pass through. As soon as you realize that you are the witness and not the emotion, the witness and not the mind, the witness and not the trembling heart, fear loses the power it once held. It cannot dominate a consciousness that is awake. It cannot frighten a being who knows, even for a moment, this is not me. And in that simple recognition, fear dissolves not because you fought it, but because you no longer claimed it as your own. To see fear clearly is to be free from it. Resistance strengthens it. Awareness dissolves it. Fear survives only when it remains blurry, undefined, hidden in the corners of your mind. It grows strongest in the shadows where you refuse to look. The moment you turn toward it with openness instead of avoidance, something shifts. Fear does not want to be seen. It wants to be believed. It thrives on your distance from it, on your unwillingness to face it directly. When you see fear with clarity, without judgment, without labeling, without trying to push it away, it begins to lose its shape, its solidity, its authority over you. Resistance is the greatest fertilizer for fear. When you resist fear, you are unknowingly feeding it energy. You tense your body, tighten your breath, contract your mind, and in that contraction, fear finds a home. You start fighting an inner battle, trying to escape the very emotion that is already inside you. Resistance makes fear feel more personal, more powerful, more permanent. It becomes something you must conquer, something you must defeat, something you must overcome. But this very effort becomes the chain that keeps fear alive. The more you push it away, the more it clings to you. The more you deny it, the more forcefully it returns. Fear grows stronger when it is treated as an enemy. Awareness, however, transforms the entire dynamic. Awareness does not resist, does not fight, does not suppress. It simply watches. Watching is the purest form of courage because it allows fear to exist without allowing it to rule. When you observe fear, its trembling, its tension, its stories, you begin to understand that fear is not a monster to be defeated, but a movement of energy passing through the body. You see how it rises, peaks, and naturally falls when it is not interfered with. Awareness exposes fear's temporary nature. What once felt like an overwhelming force becomes just another sensation. Intense perhaps, uncomfortable perhaps, but not defining, not dangerous, not ultimate. When you bring awareness to fear, you separate the emotion from the meaning you once attached to it. You realize that fear does not say anything about who you are. It does not predict your future, it does not limit your potential, and it does not reflect your worth. It is simply an ancient instinct expressing itself momentarily. And once you see it as such, without adding stories of danger or failure, fear becomes harmless. Awareness shows you that fear is just a wave. You are the ocean in which the wave appears. Clarity liberates. When you see fear clearly, its origin, its movement, its impermanence, you cannot be enslaved by it. Fear loses its drama. It becomes almost transparent. What once controlled you becomes something you can gently witness. And in that witnessing, a natural freedom emerges. Not the freedom that comes from defeating fear, but the freedom that comes from understanding it. Awareness dissolves fear the way sunlight dissolves darkness, not through force, but through illumination. Your true nature is fearless. Fear exists only in the constructed self, never in the real you. The self you believe yourself to be, your name, your story, your personality, your history, is not your original being. It is a layered identity built from experiences, conditioning, praise, criticism, memories, and the expectations of others. This constructed self is fragile because it is made of thoughts, and thoughts are never stable. Anything made of thought can be threatened, so fear naturally clings to it. Fear belongs to the realm of the ego, the psychological image you carry about who you are. This image is constantly trying to protect itself, maintain itself, and prove itself. It is always comparing, defending, struggling, because it knows it is not real, and whatever is false must always live in fear of being exposed. But beneath this constructed identity lies something untouched, your true nature. This true nature is not a personality, not a history, not a bundle of beliefs. It is pure awareness, pure presence. This awareness has no boundaries, no fragility, no need for protection. It does not depend on the approval of others, nor does it fear their rejection. It does not cling to the past or worry about the future. It simply is. In this state of being, fear cannot exist because there is nothing to threaten, nothing to lose, nothing to defend. When you are rooted in your true nature, you experience a quiet strength, a natural courage that does not come from effort but from clarity. Fear arises only when you mistake the constructed self for your real self. When you identify with your achievements, your failures, your relationships, your appearance, your status, you give fear a target. If you cling to who you think you are, fear whispers that it can be taken away. If your worth depends on success, fear warns you of failure. If your happiness depends on others, fear warns you of abandonment. Your identity is tied to the past. Fear anchors you in regret. If it is tied to the future, fear chains you to uncertainty. Every attachment the ego forms becomes an opening for fear. But when you turn inward and observe the nature of your being, you discover a presence that has never changed. It was the same when you were a child. It is the same now. And it will remain the same no matter what happens in your life. This presence cannot be harmed by circumstances because it does not belong to the world of circumstances. It is like the sky, untouched by the storms that pass through it. The storms may be violent, but the sky remains undisturbed. To touch this inner sky is to discover fearlessness, not the kind of fearlessness that requires bravery or force, but the fearlessness that comes from knowing there is nothing in you that can be broken. When you rest in this awareness, you see fear for what it truly is, an echo of the constructed self trying to survive. And the more you recognize that the constructed self is not the real you, the more naturally fear dissolves. It has nowhere left to attach, nowhere left to hide, because the one who used to believe in it is no longer present.